Hey folks, Dave Temple here. As you know, my podcast is all about talking to some of the best thriller writers in the world. But now, after nearly 2.5 years, I think it's time I toot my own horn. So with that, I'm offering my thriller, The Poser, for sale. This thriller stars Hollywood detective Patricia Pat Norelli, a rookie cop working the overnight beat when one of Hollywood's biggest stars is found dead in her Hollywood Hills home. The only problem, the star just won an Oscar and is found dead only hours later. Now, Pat sees this as a way to forge her own path and muscles her way into the case. Soon, she and partner Detective Stuart Brown find themselves deep inside a complex case with more questions than answers and a ghost of a killer. Now, this isn't my first self-published book, but it's the first one I'm very confident you're going to like. I'm pretty proud of it. And for the rest of this month, you can get the ebook for only $5.95 or the paperback for $13.95. Now, since I do this weekly podcast as a free service, perhaps you'd consider this a way to help out your fellow thriller author. Okay, here's the link, davidtemplebooks.com/books. Okay, there you'll see The Poser. Just click and you're on your way. Again, the link is davidtemplebooks.com/books. Otherwise, just head over to Amazon. Okay, thanks for your support, and now on with the show. Hello and welcome to The Thriller Zone. I'm your host, David Temple, and on today's show, I've got a guest for you. Aaron Clark, Under Color of Law. This is one of those books that you pick up and you can't put down. How many times do you get a chance to have that happen? It doesn't happen all that often, does it? Does it for you? It doesn't for me. I read a lot of books. Some of them, yeah, I kind of rip through. Others, I'm like, I'm getting through it. Anyway, Under Color of Law by Aaron Philip Clark is one of those books. So why don't I shut this trap and get to the show? We've got Aaron waiting here on The Thriller Zone.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
I am so good. I hope you are.
Yeah, definitely. It's raining though, which we normally here in LA, we get rain maybe 5 times a year. So I don't know if that's omen. We'll see.
No, it means goodness is washing on the earth.
I like that.
Yeah, I'm in San Diego, so I think I'm getting the little remnants of that.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, it's definitely a storm.
Welcome to The Thriller Zone, Aaron Clark.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. This book right here, Under Color of Law, I am constantly reminded of myself, my little inner voice going, dude, you're geeking out. You're saying some of the same things twice sometimes. But this was a powerful, powerful book.
Thank you.
I friggin' loved it. I read a lot of books, Aaron, for this show. Very few get me up at the crack of dawn and have me reading before my day starts, but this is one of those. We're going to talk about this in a second.
Appreciate that.
But I want to first get to know you because I got to know, by the way, you were or are a police officer?
No, so I was in the police academy, so in 2014, and excuse me, and so I basically was in the academy for halfway of training, and then I suffered an injury and had to essentially, they call it, leave on your own accord, but there's other terms for it, but that's kind of what happened. So due to my injury, I just couldn't finish the physical training part, which is obviously required. So,
yeah. Okay. Well, I was going, the reason I asked that is because I thought to myself, all right, this guy has either lived it or he is a mad researcher because my first, I've written a couple of books, but my first, what I'd call commercial, it's not traditionally published, but kind of that commercial feel was based on a Hollywood detective, a female Hollywood detective, no less. Because I'm a big Michael Connelly fan. And I thought, I wonder if I could do kind of a Bosch thing, but female. And I thought I had it pretty well down until I started reading this book. And then I'm like, oh, geez, I need to go back to, and I wrote two of them, a sequel. And I'm like, oh, I got to go back to school. God.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, it's almost like research by fire in my case. It's like I had so much to pull from.
Yeah.
And I think, with this book, it kind of just poured out. I had years of having grown up in a family with law enforcement and then going through it myself. I had just had a lot stored up, I guess you could say.
Well, there's a palpable resonance that you've been around the dialogue, you've been around the atmosphere. I think that's the key, Aaron. It's this feeling of I really feel like I'm there. I feel like I'm inside the police station. When I hear the conversations among their peers, there's a certain vernacular that goes with law enforcement, I believe. And boy, just nailed it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, and I worked on a little phrase because you blend like anger and empathy and violence and tenderness while still morphing in topics of law enforcement, family relationships, just a magnificent blend. And it made me walk away going, I wonder where Aaron got his passion to tell stories from. And that's how I want to start this interview.
Okay. Sure. I mean, I guess I would say that started relatively young. So I remember summer school, I must have been maybe 7 or 8. And we had this kind of creative writing workshop. And it was the best day in terms of, that summer school week when we had this workshop. And so I had a really cool teacher who just encouraged me. He just liked the story. And he was like, all right, well, write me another one with the same characters. And I was like, oh, I never thought about that. You're talking about a series here. So, every week I would just keep writing him, different stories and he would just be really into it. And so I think that kind of helped foster, some of that early passion. And, it was almost like saying like, oh, people actually like what I'm writing. And so, from there, I honestly thought early on that I would go into visual art or, maybe I had a love for comics. I thought maybe I would be a comic book writer and artist. And, life just started throwing different curveballs. And I found myself in, the film industry, having gone to film school and thought, okay, I'll be a screenwriter. And then slowly but surely that just became fiction, and I went and got my master's for fiction and that was it.
Okay, there you go. Now I'm starting to see a thread. I mean, when you step up for a master's degree in,
Yeah.
you know that you're serious. Side point, I went into my library this weekend and dug out this. Are you familiar with the portable MFA in writing?
No.
Okay.
This is the first I've heard.
Supposedly, this is the New York Writers Workshop. The only reason I tell you about this is because I broke it out. I bought this quite a while ago, and I'm interviewing all these guys like yourself who you can tell you have gone to school and really mastered your craft. So I pull it out and I'm telling my wife about it, and I'm doing one of the very first exercises in the front, and in an instant I went, oh, I'm thinking too small. So the reason I bring that up is the fact that you have taken it to the next level really tells me a lot about you. This is not just a, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to try a little writing on the side. No, you're all in.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. Okay,
Yeah.
MFA programs are not they're not easy by any stretch of the imagination. So, I think what happens oftentimes is that it becomes almost like a little creative intellectual battlefield when it comes to these workshops. And I told myself early on, I said, you know what, if I can survive some of these workshops, because there's people who really hate your stuff in there and they will tell you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I mean, some of these workshops, there was a time where one of my peers, one of the students, got into it with our professor, and it was ugly. It was bad. And so I said, well, if I can survive this, I have a pretty good shot, in getting published here.
Wow, I didn't know it was so relentless. I've heard other stories from other master's program takers, and they said, "Oh, it's such Such a supportive environment. I'm like, supportive is good. I'm all for that, and I'm all for being fair and gracious. But sometimes I just want you to go, Aaron. If we're in the class together, tell me what you hated about this. I mean, really, rip it a new one because I need a little help of objectivity.
Mhm.
And you know what? It also begs this question. It's obvious that you're a big reader, which the best writers, I think, in my opinion, are the biggest readers. Do you have some favorite authors that these are the tops?
I would say the biggest influence early on was Walter Mosley. Actually came across Devil in a Blue Dress. That was in my father's library. And I was young. I wasn't supposed to be reading that particular row of books, right?
Oops.
Because next to Devil in a Blue Dress was Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver. And what else did he? Oh, it was Toni Morrison. I think also Beloved was there. So it was a whole row, right? Where it was like, obviously, this is not where I should be. And then he had comic books in there too, which is probably where I should have been. But, I read Walter Mosley, Devil in a Blue Dress, and it just opened up a new world to me. And I said, wow, I think the story hit me on such a visceral level where I was so interested in the history, being young. I think I was probably maybe like 11 or 12. Okay. And then also this crime, and then these kind of nefarious politicians, and I was just like, wow, like you can write this stuff, like we can do this. And so, it just changed. It was like a spark went off in my head. And I'll always remember that reading experience. It's like when I sit down and write, I try and capture that. I try and capture, as I'm reading kind of my own stuff to see if I can get that spark back that I had when I first read Devil in a Blue Dress.
And I did not know that you had written so much. I mean, this is kind of, I wanted to say this is your debut, but it's not really your debut. Because in the front, I've got The Furious Way, The Science of Paul, and A Healthy Fear of Man. Now, is The Furious Way, is that the one with the dog on the front? The red cover with the dog?
Yeah.
Dude, I went on Amazon over the weekend just because I wanted to read some more of the other stuff. And I started that, and I was as far as I could go in the Take a View Now.
Yeah.
That one, that's gripping.
It's probably the most, in terms of pulpy, it's the most, it's the pulpiest thing I've written.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Pulp with a capital P.
Yeah. And for me, it was kind of a palate cleanser because I had written the Paul Little novel. So the first book I wrote was The Science of Paul. And that actually was my master's thesis. Oh, wow. And so, I had written that while in grad school, about halfway. I think I got about halfway in grad school. And then I finished it, once I was done with classes, you go into your thesis, your thesis term. And so at the time I was living in North Carolina, and it wasn't a whole lot to do. So I just finished it, and I was able to, get it actually published in the hands of a New Pope Press prior to submitting it to the thesis board. So I already had the publishing contract. And so I said, all right, well, you know what? I think it's done. I submitted it. And luckily, it just happened this way. But James Salas, who is another, we're talking about authors who are a big influence. I read a lot of James Salas, and James Salas had taught at one time from my MFA program. And so you could pick any faculty member who taught. So I sent it to James. I said, hey, if you have some time, I would love for you to, be on my thesis board. And he said, yeah, no problem. Super nice guy. And so he was a part of my thesis board, and then he loved the novel so much. And I said, do you mind blurbing this thing? And he said, yeah, of course. So he gave me this wonderful blurb.
Which I'm going to interrupt you here because this was my very next point. I'm going to read it for you. T.S. Eliot referred to it as tradition and individual talent, the manner in which new work at once honors, builds upon, and questions what has come before. Chester Hines, Richard Wright, James Baldwin, Aaron Philip Clarke has been paying attention. Man, how did that make you feel? I mean, dude, that's not just this is a gripping page turner.
It was early on a pinnacle in my writing career. When I got that blurb, I think I I said, oh, okay. Like, obviously you're happy, right? Because you're like, James Salas gets this, he gets it. But at the same time, I was like, it was such a just monumental and generous blurb. And I, for a while it was up on my wall, because I said, that's what I'm trying to kind of capture this. There's a lot of existentialism in there, but it's also hearkening back to, the Harlem Renaissance writers, and really having that kind of poetic gravitas is what I was after, especially with that book, Science of Paul.
Well, when I saw the quote, it made me stop and pay attention, thus the final line. But then I realized, oh, this is the cat that wrote Drive.
Yeah.
With that turned into the movie Ryan Gosling, right?
Right.
Which is one of my all-time favorites. Yeah, he's super cool and easy to look at, and he's a great driver. But the story is so powerful. I'll never forget this, if you'll allow me. I went to the theater to watch it. I was so taken by it, I went out and bought the soundtrack that next day, listened to it over and over, bought the book, went back, saw the movie again, because for whatever reason, it was so gripping. And you used the word existential, and that's so true. That one final scene, not to ruin it for anybody, but where he's sitting, leaning up, you think he's a goner.
And then he keeps going. That's the drive.
Exactly. Yeah. And the way the camera moves in on that, and you're like, oh my God, that can't have happened. And then it didn't. Oh, just a solid. And so anyway, my point is to have that kind of a quote front and center on your website, what that must have done to boost your confidence, I cannot imagine.
Yeah. I mean, coming out of the MFA program, I felt like you have to be pretty confident to think, okay, I'm going to sit down and write a book,
Yeah.
And I think, I had experiences within the program that I won't say shook my confidence, but I would say kind of were like, are people just not getting it, what I'm after here? And so that quote really helped solidify how I felt about my own writing, and I really just said to myself, you know what, especially with the Science of Paul, I was like, I'm not pulling any punches. This is going to be this type of story that I want to tell, which really centers on, and at that time, nobody was really interested in reading about, in terms of publishers, big publishers, I should say, books that centered on ex-cons, and so Paul Little is this ex-con who's really just doesn't have a place in the world, really feels cut off, and his grandfather dies and he ends up inheriting this land in North Carolina. And all he wants to do is get back to that. And there's so many obstacles and challenges that he has to overcome. And he gets swept up in this murder mystery.
Two questions, quick. What part of North Carolina?
Oh, at that time, I was actually living out Winston-Salem.
Okay.
So
that's where I was born.
Really? You were born in Winston-Salem?
I was born in Winston-Salem.
Oh, man.
Grew up in there's a town right outside of Winston-Salem. You're not going to believe what the name of the town is. And I grew up across the street from thousands of acres of tobacco. The town I grew up in, Tobaccoville.
Oh, yeah.
Right outside Winston-Salem. Yeah. I have met very few people who have spent any time in and around Winston-Salem, but that's cool.
Well, my first year in college, I went to North Carolina School of the Arts. That's where I went to film school, right there in Winston. So, yeah, that's a small world.
It is a small world. And now you're in Pasadena and I'm San Diego, right?
And I used to live in San Diego.
Bam! I love the way the world just throws us little things like that. Okay, and so the other thing is you were referring to, Shotgun Honey published.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I say that is I've discovered more up-and-coming authors from Shotgun Honey. Matter of fact, Mark Westmoreland was on the show, J.B. Stevens. We got a couple of folks coming up next month, Ashley Irvin, Bobby Matthews, Ron Earl, yeah. Ron Earl, yeah. Guy has an eye for talent. An ear for talent and an eye for art, because I think I heard somewhere that he designs a lot of the covers, and I'm like, man, this guy. Okay, so let's get to this. I do want to say that one of the most powerful things that you accomplished, in my opinion, certainly not negating your power of entertainment, is how you made me stop and think. I think that's the best and highest compliment I can pay you, because I like entertainment. It was very entertaining, but boy, it made me look through life through a slightly different lens. And I feel like I'm pretty broad spectrum kind of guy, but powerful that way, man.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very high compliment. I guess I try and achieve the trifecta, right? Which is to, obviously entertain, but also enlighten and educate, when I kind of sit down and craft these stories. And oftentimes I think in terms of making sure that the story is at the forefront, and really ensuring that it's entertaining. But at the same time, if someone walks away and says, "Oh, that was cool," or "That's an okay story," it actually doesn't. It makes me feel like, it's almost like, well, that was satisfactory, right? It's like it's a solid C. And for me, whether you love it or hate it, I just want you to have some sort of reaction, right? But if you walk away kind of apathetic, then it's like, and you can't please everybody, but that's a litmus test for me.
Well, you cannot walk away from this book and not be affected in some way. And it's funny, my wife will say, she'll cook a dish and she'll go, "How you like it?" And she'll know if I go, "Yeah, it was good." If it was good. She knows that is not really that great. But if I go, "Babe, this is incredible." So it must be tonality up or down, whatever it is.
Possibly.
Yeah. And I told her, she goes, because she sees me over in the corner in the breakfast nook, at 5 a.m. sitting there reading under the light. And she goes, "Is that a good book?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah." She goes, "Oh, it's not a, oh, that's good."
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, it's like when you really come across something that you connect to, like for me, obviously the first thing was Devil in a Blue Dress. It's something that happens just in your brain. And then also it's like a physical reaction where you can't stop reading, and so you just find yourself, you have this vicarious experience.
Yes.
With, for me, it was with Easy Rollins. And so that's what I was hoping people would have, with Trevor Finnegan. You may not agree with what he does. You may say, "Oh man, get it together." But I want you to at least feel, kind of have that feeling that you're there with him, that you're going through almost like real time, as he gets thrown these curveballs. You're solving this mystery with him.
And you know what? I admired his bravery. I admired his, I'm not a black guy in America today, so I got to look through that lens and appreciate what that is like. And it always it humbles me to realize that I always have to be aware of where everybody is coming from. And I love that. And I love the interracial relationships and the way he handled it. And then of course his girlfriend that is early on in the story. And I think, it was wonderful, Aaron, how you teed up this love story, then you kind of stole it away, and then he has this, pretty shallow relationship. I'm sure we're all kind of familiar with him one time or another. And then the way you bring her back, oh man. I know I'm geeking out here. I think my point is the fact that you're able to layer in so many layers of emotion, the anxiety of being a black cop, the anxiety of trying to fight what he thought was right when maybe he was turning his back on his fellow brothers in the law enforcement.
Yeah, when I conceived the story, I from my experience, I didn't have Trevor Finnegan's experience. But I know officers who had something similar. And so really he's an amalgamation of a lot of officers that I encountered.
Right.
And I wanted to kind of show that there's something about being a police officer where, especially if you're a black officer, where you exist in this really interesting space. So it's politics coming at you. It's things that you have to kind of balance within the department, their society view of you. And I wanted to kind of pile that on Trevor, all with this idea that, yes, he's going to be solving this case that is bringing a lot of these issues up. But oftentimes, what drives people to become law enforcement, I think it's easy for us to say, okay, they're just, maybe they're bullies or they always were bullies. But for Trevor, it's trauma. And when I was in the academy, it was interesting because a lot of my fellow recruits didn't go deep into it, but they alluded to something happening within their lives that drove them in that direction. Now, not all of them, because there was a few in there who really just, I think, wanted to hold a gun. But there was a good number of them that something happened, and that is what kind of sent them on a different path that maybe they weren't necessarily thinking they would go on.
Well, mission accomplished on stacking the deck for Finnegan. I mean, mission accomplished. The other thing is, there is a little bit of wild, wild west. I want to grab a gun and, yippee-ki-yay and take authority into my own hands mentality, which is a little misdirected, in my opinion, especially when it comes to so many of the things, and we could spend hours on this, but we won't, that have happened of recent that are tragic, doesn't even begin to touch this abuse of power, et cetera. And that's what I think that's what I walked away, Aaron, so appreciating. You didn't, it wasn't preachy. You never set out to do that. You just set out to show this broken guy who was trying to do the best that he could. And he was a little withdrawn emotionally, yet the integrity of what he wanted to do by uncovering the truth is what I think I admired the most.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that sums it up. I mean, it's not easy, being in a position like Trevor, and to get in his position, he had to make some choices that a lot of people, I'm not one to read reviews, but a lot of people were just like, when that moment reveals itself of kind of what he did to get where he's at, it's either people either love it or kind of hate it, but it's for me, it was realistic because for him to be in that position and have a father like he has, not a father who is deputy chief or something, but to have a father who he has, who really didn't pave the way for him, right? Because there's this whole thing of legacy within law enforcement, especially LAPD, where, if you have a family member who's up there, you can skate through a little bit, but Trevor didn't have that.
Not exactly. It does beg the question, and I think I read somewhere there is a sequel coming, right, Aaron?
There is. So Blue Like Me will be out in November. Yeah. All I can say is that this one is very twisty, and essentially is going to deal with the idea, if to talk about it in terms of theme, but one of the themes, one of the overarching themes is this idea of, toxic relationships that exist within law enforcement. The idea that people will do whatever it's almost a hive mentality. And that, if your partner is doing something, it's a lot of officers who got in trouble who said, well, my partner roped me into this, or I was just trying to help my partner. So right. It's going to deal with this idea of, toxicity with these relationships that exist within law enforcement.
And does he become a private eye in the sequel, or right?
He does. So he kind of starts off, at the end of Under Color of Law. I mean, he can't really go back to being a cop at this time. So it's good.
And when you read the book, you'll find out why. Yeah.
Yeah, he can't really go back. So, he finds himself working kind of as a consultant, and then in the second book, he is a private investigator, but not in the sense that what people are used to, because he's investigating a particular type of individual.
Well, you are being coy, aren't you? Will you tag along with and or spend time with a private investigator to create that world with a little bit more realism?
Well, the good thing is, at one point in my life, I was studying to be a private investigator because, yeah. So I had a lot of info. I had, just like with LAPD, I still have a lot of training information, and so I got a whole closet full of stuff. And so, when I start pulling that stuff out, it's just scattered all over the floor. And I just kind of start organizing and thinking, okay, well, what can I pull in to bring a level of realism to it? Now, in this book, Trevor, like I said, he's a private investigator, but it's just license only. In terms of what he's doing, he still operates very much like a homicide detective. And so he carries himself the same way. Now, he understands his position, when he does encounter real, people who are sworn and, quote unquote, real cops and still cops,
Right.
So he understands, how far he can go. But, he's still very much Trevor Finnegan, still sharpening those detective skills and still getting, kind of pushed through the ringer, so to speak. So.
And I'm going to assume that Sarada stays in the picture.
Yeah. So she's a big part of book 2. She is the catalyst in some ways. It's set in 2016, so it's been a few years. So they're together and really trying to work on having this fruitful life. They're living in Sierra Madre, up kind of right above Pasadena, the nice little mountain town, or foothill town, I should say. Yeah. And so they're kind of, they found a little bubble that they can exist in, and they had, he has his art, studio, and he's enjoying himself. Money is not an issue, and they kind of just looking forward to taking this trip out of the country, and that kind of symbolizes a lot, right? Because it actually set a few days before the election. So there's a lot for Sarah. There's a lot riding on this trip because, she's kind of like, I don't know what's going on, and I think it's good we might not be in the country.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the way you dance around that. You're trying so hard not to tell me, but I do want to, before we get to rapid fire questions, as we start to wrap, I got a classic question that I offer all my guests, and I got a good feeling that I'm going to get a great answer here. What is the best and perhaps most concise piece of advice that you could offer my listeners? And my listener base is established writers and up-and-coming writers, a lot of students, and this is coming from mail that comes to me, and they're all looking for the secret sauce, the magic recipe, the 10 points with which you craft your career. And I'd love to hear what you have, Aaron.
Okay. I might have 2.
Yeah, you have as all you want. Yeah.
Which is interesting because I told this to my students. I teach at a UCLA Extension. And so I always open my class with this, but I tell them, oftentimes they say they don't know what they want to write, right? Oh, I don't know what I want to write. I'm still on the fence. I got this idea. That's that idea. And I say, okay, well, go into a bookstore and see if you can find a book that mirrors your idea. Look around, see if there's something on the shelf that's like that. And if you can't find it, then that's what you should write. You should write the book that's missing. You should write the book that you're so passionate about that you would want to read, but doesn't exist yet. And that's what I tell them, because I said, you got to have passion to get through, 300 pages. So, if you're not excited about it, you're not enthusiastic about it, or you feel like there's something that it's already been done, so to speak, or something out there already exists that may have done what you're trying to do better, find something else that you're really, really passionate about and you have that energy for. So that's my first little piece of advice. Number 2, and this is just my personal, philosophy when it comes to writing, but also when it comes to editing, is, to paraphrase James Baldwin, he said, write a sentence as clean as a bone. The idea that, and when I'm writing, I often have a poetry book next to me because it makes sure that my language that I'm using is getting to the heart of what I'm really trying to say. Dialogue is obviously tricky, but when it comes to prose, it's just something where I just appreciate how poets can say so much using a few words, and it could be poetic, it could be beautiful, and it could just have this stamp that just is so declarative where you're like, oh, okay. And so that's what I strive for, at least with my, my prose, where, I'm really trying to, get to the beauty of something. And it's hard, for poets are masters at it, but for fiction authors, it's kind of like, we often use more words than we need, and so for me, that's what I focus on when I'm writing and when I'm editing is like, okay, what are we really trying to say here? And how can we really craft this in a beautiful declarative way?
Two really good observations here. Number one, I love the way that you say, find the book that that hasn't been written yet and do it with a certain kind of passion, because I agree with you. I often think this. If you're going to carve out, on average, let's just say on average, a year of your life to craft this book, sometimes maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 6, but by the time you write it and then rewrite it and draft it and, workshop it, etc., you're going to have a lot of time invested. So I think that's great advice. Was it Elmore Leonard that says, take out all the stuff people hate, Yeah. Take out the stuff that bores people. And I'm torn here. I think about Pat Conroy, for instance, and I reference him often, who can take one sentence and paint this elaborate oil painting of a scene. Mm-hmm. And you go, how did you do that? It's just words. Then you can take Elmore Leonard over here, strip out any word that isn't even remotely necessary, and accomplish an equally fabulous feat. I think that's one of the reasons I write, to study the guys who really make me go, whoa.
Yeah.
And I think you make me go, whoa. So there you
go. Well, I look at it, every book is I tell my students, every book is an opportunity to learn something new. It's once you start writing, you're no longer, and it's kind of how I feel about film school. So before I went to film school, I watched films for pleasure, right? But once I went to film school, I'm like, oh, you start noticing everything becomes technical. So when I read, it's the same approach now, where it's like, I'm reading and I'm thinking, oh, wow, this author executed this really well. It's showing me something. And so, I tell my students, all the time, because oftentimes when you get writing students, they have this notion that they're going to write, the great American novel, and that's what they're in there for. So they won't read anything else, right, besides what they call highbrow literature. And so, and I'm the crime guy. So I tell them, I say, you know what, you can learn a lot when it comes to suspense, when it comes to thrilling people from crime writers and thriller writers. You have to get out of this kind of, well, I'm this type of writer. You have to open it up, because these books are all like little classes, and it's an opportunity for you to be able to learn.
Where do you teach? You said UCLA Extension. Do you teach in Pasadena?
Yeah, so they have online, but they also have they're back on campus now. So you have the option, right? So I could go over to Westwood. It's just a bit of a drive, so I haven't quite signed up for that. But online works for me. I think until maybe, if there happens to be a class I feel like will work best with me there, I may consider it, but right now online it's fine.
Well, I'm going to say this. If you were teaching at the Westwood campus, I would make the drive to take that class. I would.
Thank you.
I think I could learn a lot from you. And P.S. that campus is pretty stunning.
Oh yeah.
God.
But just as a little side note, do you remember it was the mystery bookstore that used to be adjacent to UCLA, and they closed. I want to say they closed. Was it 2012? Maybe. I remember that day because I was apparently one of the last readers to read. The next day they shut the door.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was like the next day. That was it. Like, we ended up shutting that place down.
Man,
But yeah, it was a great bookstore. I mean, it's a shame, but
there is nothing like a great bookstore, isn't it true? Ah,
oh yeah.
God. Okay. Are you familiar with my rapid fire questions?
Yes.
Question number 1.
Okay.
It's so easy. These are actually kind of ordinary. Pen and paper or keyboard?
Keyboard.
Music in the background or silence?
Silence.
Plotter or pantser?
Oh, plotter.
Yeah. Question number 2. And this one is likely because I'm a filmmaker and I see most books as eventual TV series or film. I can't help it. Okay, Hollywood has just called, Aaron, and good news, your book has just been greenlit for a major motion picture.
Hey.
Yeah. Who would you like to see play Trevor Finnegan?
Actor who is on HBO's Insecure, which actually ended. I think they did their last season.
Kind of what I get with that is, and a lot of people do it differently, but you probably, somewhere along the way, as you were crafting Finn, you perhaps pictured in your head who this was. Yeah, I tend to do a similar thing. You kind of, put some clothes on this character and hold them there so that you kind of hold them in their space while you're writing. All right. On a political front, if you're comfortable stating such, what is the one thing that is, if you could, we'll use the phrase wave a magic wand, for lack of a better term, and change one thing in this is a loaded question. If you could change one thing in the LAPD hierarchy, or perhaps in the overall humanity of law enforcement, what would that one thing be? I know it's chock full of.
That's a big one. Ooh.
And you can be broad on this. You don't have to.
I would say training. So I think a lot of the issues that happen are issues that are cultivated within the academy. And I would completely start brand new in terms and get rid of a lot of the 1970s and 80s type of training and start brand new and really craft a more intellectual atmosphere that encourages critical thinking. And I'll leave that there.
I got to slow down and sip on that one. That's very thought-provoking. I'm going to help you out here on a lighter note. You have been asked to speak at, let's call it UCLA. You have all these eager young faces staring at you. They're looking for that one little gem that will help them steer their course. And yes, it's similar to what we mentioned a second ago, but to make it different, let's say you're speaking to a crowd when you suddenly look out and see you. You're seeing your 18-year-old self staring back at you. Here's the question. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell young Aaron as it pertains to choosing a career and a purpose for your life to come?
Oh.
Yeah, this isn't any lightweight show, baby. I'm getting in there.
Wow. Trust your instincts.
Excellent.
Trust your instincts, because for me, while I did go from filmmaking and writing and visual, I used all those skills. Every class I ever took in film school, every painting class I ever took, they all get used. So trust your instincts, follow your gut. But it's to be a modern Renaissance individual these days is actually a good thing. Be hyphenated, author, screenwriter, filmmaker, just be hyphenated, because you're going to use all those skills one way or the other.
I love that. Be hyphenated. That should be a t-shirt.
Might have to copyright that.
Yeah. Hey, I'm a hyphen. I'm an author and a podcast host and a filmmaker. So I'm with you. If one thing is not necessarily working, or the trends of the time fluctuate a bit, you can pick up some of your other more developed talents. Yeah.
Or for me, I use a lot of my filmmaking and editing skills for book promotion. So, I did my own book trailer. So all that stuff, I recorded parts of my own book, things like that. That's Facebook ads, all that stuff is me. As I move forward and we're, I'm working right now to get the with executives to package the pilot for Under Color of Law, which is we're working to get it in good shape. I had to do the pitch deck. My little graphic design skills came in handy, all those Adobe classes, and I was able to do the pitch deck and all that stuff. So you never lose those skills. They're there.
Be hyphenated.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think my mantra would be first be caffeinated, then be hyphenated.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So is it getting put into a production in some form or fashion?
Yeah. I mean, that's the plan. So the book won the Book Pipeline Adaptation Award. And so basically how that works is run by pipeline artists who, do a lot for screenwriters and writers as well. But it won that award. And part of that deal is that, they work with me, it's undisclosed executives, but they work with you to get it together in terms of packaging and getting the pilot in great shape. And then, they kind of tee up folks who are going to get it. So I kind of already know where it's headed and who will get their eyes on it. And so, essentially it is just kind of like, make it as tight as possible and strong as possible. So, people will go for it. I mean, obviously there's the rights, right? There's film rights you should always sell. But for me, I kind of felt like, well, I spent all this money in film school. I got the receipts. I should at least be able to write, the script. Something's wrong if I can't write. If they hate it, they hate it. But something's wrong if I can't sit down and write a pilot,
Right. And is that a TV length or film length?
It's television. Yeah.
Okay,
so
so
right
40...
now they look for like premiere streamer sort of
gotcha.
Approach. Yeah.
It's exciting time, isn't it? I'm gonna talk out of both sides of my mouth, so work with me here. It's an exciting time because there's so much need for collateral, right? We need more product, right? So there's so many more streaming opportunities. Conversely, in this hand, wife and I have been watching a vast sum of volume of material, and you can tell the ones that, my opinion only, that were either rushed or not the best writers, or they're just cranking out a theme that has been beat to friggin' death.
Yep.
And you just go, man, how did that get made?
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. I think right now that there's this desire for IP. Everybody wants content. It's grab. We don't care if it's IP is just being snatched up, left and right. And so there's a lot of stuff that you kind of have to sift through because it's a lot of stuff that just isn't high quality. And I think, it's one of those things where I hope, at least with what I'm doing, I'm the type where if it doesn't feel right or it feels like the wrong direction, I'm okay to say, we don't have to do it, because I don't think every book needs to be made into a movie or TV show. I don't think it has to. I think, people need to be okay with just letting books exist as books,
Yeah, that sounds so good, Aaron. It sounds so noble. I have a hard time thinking that way, I suppose, because every time I write a story, who did I say this to or said this to me? It often feels like I'm transcribing a story as I'm like watching a movie and I'm transcribing it into my book. That's kind of how and that's because I suppose I'm so visually oriented.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, to your point, you're right. Every book doesn't have to be made into it, but dadgum, I'm going to try my best to turn all mine that way.
I mean, yeah, that's the thing. If you have, and that's what I tell people, and I tell my students a lot, is if they have that component there, right, where you're seeing that story and it is visual, and you're saying like, oh, I can see this, how the scene would unfold, and you have that kind of ability to write that script, then I always tell them, adapt your own, go for it. But I think if you're an author and you don't have that and you're kind of like, hey, look, I'm fine in my lane. I like to write, for those people, I say, yeah, that's fine. If you go for it, sell the rights off, do whatever you want to do. But I also feel like there's times where I've gone and I've seen the movie, I've seen the adaptation, and I've thought, we didn't need that, because they can't all be Drive. They can't all be, they can't all be wonderful adaptations. And so rather than force something, I say, it's okay that it's a book, and we as consumers should just let that be what it is.
Yeah. Quick question. This triggered something you just said. I still have one more rapid fire question for you. What do you think about screenplay writing? What kind of advice would you give to my writer friends listening who fancy themselves or would like to consider getting into the screenwriting business, which is a tough one?
Oh yeah. It's not like writing a book, and you have to go into it knowing that what you're writing is a blueprint.
Yeah.
It's part of the reason I switched to fiction is because I wanted to have a little autonomy, right? I wanted to be able to have a say in how the story went. If I write a screenplay, it doesn't exist on its own. It's the ideas for it to be made. And that is nothing more than a blueprint for the filmmaker. So, if you're okay with that, then you're gonna be fine when it comes to transitioning and becoming, writing a screenplay or becoming a screenwriter. If you have trouble with that, and you feel like you have to have the final say, don't do it.
Don't do it.
Just don't do it.
But you don't see screenplay writing as its own craft as insurmountable, do you?
It's probably the jaded part of me. I think I spent too much time in film school. It messed me up. I just don't, okay. I don't see it. I think it's a wonderful art form. Don't get me wrong. I really think, like, I've read screenplays where they blow me away. And I've been like, well, that was a wonderful story. And inside my head, the movie that's in my head, it's a blockbuster. It's an Oscar winner.
Sure.
But then, someone's got to take that and they're going to have to make that into, a film. And it might not translate the way that you saw it. Yeah. And because of that little step, that little big step, that's why I just can't, I don't caution my students, but I tell them it's a different hat you're wearing.
Yeah.
So just understand that going in, it's a different hat. Unless you are going to be the creator and the director and you're going to take this thing over or you're independently funding it, but if you're going to go kind of the traditional route and you're going to pitch this thing, just be ready to hear some very wackadoo stuff that people are not going to get it, or people are going to say, what if, because the worst questions always start with, in Hollywood, what if we did? And it's always like, you already know where it's headed.
What if instead of a man, it's a woman?
Yeah.
And instead, yeah.
And sometimes changes work, right? So you look at Lawrence Block. The other night I was watching 8 Million Ways to Die, right? Yeah. And, it worked with him being a LA County sheriff. It was something, it's a different story a little bit, the bones are there, but somehow, some way, setting it in LA just was like, maybe it felt a little more hard boiled or a little more, it's drenched. Each shot is drenched in sunlight, but it's so dark, and it's just like this, he's terrible. I mean, Scudder he's got problems, but it's just like, it's set in this really like, it's the 80s. So it's like this layer of smog on everything, and it just felt different than when I read the book and I was like, okay, well, this is New York, this is the East Coast. But something about the film was different. And in that way it worked, but the spirit of the book was still there, but it's a little bit of a different, in terms of mise en scène, it's different,
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Now my fifth and final is way out of left field.
Okay.
But I know you can handle it on a somewhat similar note to number one. Broadway has now called and wants to turn Under Color of Law into a big Broadway musical. Okay, wait. And you get to choose some of the theme of what the show will become. So the question is, what artist or sort of music would you choose to play the backdrop, or better yet, the environment of this Broadway show, Under Color of Law.
Okay.
Yeah. See, you can't get this just everywhere.
This is, okay, let me think about this one.
Yeah.
All right, so I would say
Uh-huh.
Terrence Blanchard in terms of kind of a score.
Okay.
I would have to have Terrence Blanchard,
All right.
you know, very orchestral. But then in terms of maybe just building the soundtrack out. So when I was writing Under Color of Law, and even when I'm writing this one, I was listening to a lot of 90s grunge. And so Trevor Finnegan is this lover of the 90s. And so I would have, a lot of throw some renditions of, maybe even Terrence could do it, but renditions of like Nirvana, Pearl Jam in there. Just kind of these darker versions of these alternative kind of maybe grungy, 90s rock songs. And I think that would be interesting. I think that'd be kind of fun.
Well, and here's part of the reason I asked this, Aaron, because who would have ever thought a handful of years back, that anybody would create a Broadway musical out of a character out of political history, say like Hamilton.
Yeah.
And it become such a phenomenon.
Yeah.
So my mind always, I'm always thinking, well, why not? I kind of live my life, and why not? Try and see it. But yeah, so a 90s grunge, Terrence Blanchard inspired Broadway musical called Under Color of Law. I like it.
I mean, I guess that's the pitch right there.
That is the pitch. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll take my 10% and if you'd like to learn more about Aaron, visit him at aaronphilipclark.com. You can follow Aaron on Twitter. You got to write this one down. It's _WriteMeAWorld. That is the most creative one I've seen yet, Aaron. I'll tell you that one.
Thank you.
And this has been a hoot.
Oh, this has been great. This is a lot of fun, David. Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to come. And I'm telling you, dude, you're going to be one of those guys. I have a feeling, 5 and 10, if not sooner, years from now, we're going to be going, that guy.
That guy. Well, hey, I would love to be that guy. That sounds good to me.
I think you already are that guy. Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Either way, you're back on the show to be talking about the next one. So you can just count on that.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for your time. I know that I've gone a half hour over, but shit happens.
It's good, man. This has been great. A lot of fun.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a good book, Under Color of Law, Aaron Clark. Man, appreciate your time. A lot of fun. All right, before I get to next week's guest, let me say thank you. Thank you so much for your support of The Thriller Zone. We are rapidly approaching our first 100 subscribers on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/DavidTempleAuthor. So thank you so much. Also, thank you for the letters that have been coming in saying how much you like the show and who you'd like to see on the show. And if you haven't done so yet, write us at thethrillerzone@gmail.com. You can also swing by any one of your podcast channels, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, Google, Amazon, iHeartRadio, you name it. Leave us a review. 5 stars. We really like. Now, next week's show, it's kind of a generic, it's an arc, they hadn't had everything completely finished. But my guest is Ward Larson, and the book is Assassin's Edge. If you're a Ward Larson fan, I think you're in for a real treat. I will admit, it's my first time reading him, and I'm very excited. And I'm well into the book, and it is a riveting read. So join me next week as we kick off April. I'm not gonna sing, but join us as we kick off April. And boy, do we have a stack of massive talent here at your front row seat to the best thriller authors in the world. Where else? The Thriller Zone. Until next time, I'm David Temple. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time on The Thriller Zone.